Good day. We are now on week three of our lessons, and allow me to share my slides there. Experiments, observations, and document analysis. As I've said, welcome to week three of Applied Research Methods. Today, we focus on three foundational ways of knowing: experiments, observations, and document analysis. Each method has its own strengths and challenges, and together they help us build a richer understanding of the world. Experiments test cause and effect. Observations let us see authentic human behavior. Document analysis allows us to treat texts, images, and policies as data. By the end of the week, you'll see how these methods complement one another, or at least by the end of this section. This week is structured in terms of three, no? This week is structured in terms of three lessons. Lesson 7 covers experiments, how to test causation through manipulation and control, and we'll unpack true experiments, quasi experiments, and natural experiments. Lesson 8 explores observation, how to watch systematically, whether through structured coding or open ended field notes. And lesson 9 introduces document analysis, treating texts and media as windows into culture, ideology, and power. Each method is not just a technical tool, but a way of seeing and asking questions. Let's begin with lesson 7: experiments, testing, and cause and effect. Experiments are all about establishing cause and effect relationships. They're considered the gold standard in research because they can tell us not just if variables are related, but whether one actually influences the other. That's why it's very important to know cause and effect. Take James, for example. He believed playing Mozart music is in classroom could boost math performance. He tested it in one class and found students did slightly better. But here's the problem. His design was flawed. Maybe the teacher was just excellent. Maybe the class size was smaller, or maybe those students were already high achievers to begin with. Without proper controls, we can't say Mozart was the cause. James confused correlation with causation, a common mistake in very weak experimental research designs. Let's break down the flaws. First, the teacher effect. Was the improvement due to Mozart or just a great teacher? Second, class size differences. Smaller classes often lead to better performance. Third, selection bias. Maybe those students were already stronger before the study. And fourth, no control group. Without a match group for comparison, the findings don't hold up. This shows why experimental rigor matters so much. So we need to ask yourself, why we study experiments carefully? Now, why do we study experiments carefully. Experiments are designed to carefully answer the question, does X cause Y? With proper design and control, we can rule out alternative explanations. That's what makes experiment our most powerful tool for causal inference, but only if they're done carefully. Let's look at the logic of experiments. What's the logic of experiments? At their heart, experiments are about isolating cause and effect. They are not just if two variables are related to each other, no? Uh, but when one variable influences the other. To do this, researchers must eliminate competing explanations and strengthen confidence in their results. That's why experimental logic depends on a few essential elements. What are these essential elements? That there are four key elements in experimental design. Four key elements. The four essentials in an experimental designs are one, the independent variable, what we manipulate, the dependent variable, what we measure, a proper control group for valid comparison, and most importantly, random assignment, which ensures participants are equally distributed so that bias is minimized. These elements together create the conditions necessary for causal inference. So you might ask, why is random assignment important? Why is random assignment important? Random assignment is the magic ingredient in experimental research. Without it, groups might differ before the study even starts, like higher achievers clustering in one group. With it, every variable, even those we haven't measured, is balanced across groups. That means differences we see afterward are more likely due to the intervention, not hidden biases. That's what randomization does. And it is here where you see the power of the experimental control. What's the power of the experimental control? Control is what separates experiments from mere observation. By holding constant what we can and randomizing what we can't, we create a simplified setting that isolates cause. Some call these artificial, but it's exactly this artificiality that gives experiments their power. There are many types of experiments. No? As you can see, there's more on the slides to read, and I hope you can pause the recording and just read through also. No, there are many types of experiments. Not every experiment looks the same, obviously. Some are tightly controlled but less realistic. Others are more natural but harder to interpret casually. We'll look at three types of experiments: true experiments, quasi experiments, and natural experiments. Each represents a trade off between rigor and real world practicality. Let's begin with true experiments. No, this is very important. True experiments. True experiments include random assignment, controlled manipulation, and a clear control group. They give us the strongest evidence for causality, but they can be costly, artificial, or even unethical depending on what we are studying. So that's the gold standard. Next are quasi experiments. Quasi experiments don't use random assignment. For example, testing a new teaching method in one classroom versus another. They're often the best we can do in real world settings, but we have to use careful statistics and interpretation to avoid false conclusions. Next are natural experiments. Natural experiments. Natural experiments take advantage of real world events like new laws or disasters that create treatment and comparison groups. We didn't assign the conditions, but we can still study their effects. These are less controlled but highly relevant also to real life. Let's compare them, no? Let's compare these tests, no? So comparing experimental design. Uh, uh, I will go to the text below so you can check it out. If we rank them, true experiments give us the strongest causal claims. Quasi-experiments are weaker but still useful. Natural experiments trade control for real-world authenticity. Correlational studies at the bottom only show relationships but not causation. The challenge is finding the right balance in your research question. Let's look at an example: sleep and performance. Here, we see a very practical example. We might test whether sleep affects test performance, and you hear the word affect or effect because this is the only instance we can speak of effectivity or affecting, no? The independent variable is hours of sleep. The dependent variable, just a minute, please. The dependent variable is test performance. We predict more sleep leads to better performance. That's a clear, testable hypothesis. Now let's look at the experimental design. In this design, 90 students are recruited and randomly assigned to sleep for 6, or 8 hours in a lab. We then test them under identical conditions. This design controls for outside variables like caffeine intake, test difficulty, and time of the day. However, this will bring about ethical concerns. Sorry. This will bring about ethical concerns. The issue here is, can we ethically force students to sleep only 4 hours, knowing it harms them? Experiments must balance rigor with responsibility. Sometimes what looks perfect on paper cannot be ethically executed in real life. So let's look at alternative approaches to the sleep question. To handle the ethical dilemma, we might instead do a correlational study, a natural experiment like daylight savings, or modest manipulations like 7 versus 9 hours of sleep. Each loses some rigor but keeps the participants rather safe. So there are ins and ways out. The lesson is this: James' mistake was assuming causation without proper design. Real experiments demand discipline and humility. As researchers, we must always balance rigor, ethics, and practicality. Ethics and practicality. Let's now look at some key takeaway in our discussion of experiments. To sum up, experiments establish causation through manipulation and control. Random assignment is key, and different designs involve trade-offs. And above all, ethics set the boundaries of what we can study. Your Canvas task is this, no? Choose one research question. Please just read. Your task is to choose a research question, define your independent and dependent variables, sketch a design with control and assignment, and reflect on ethical constraints. You have to submit a 1 to 2 paragraphs plan about this one. But please collate it because we will put this side by side with the turn-ins for lesson 8 as well as lesson 9. Let's move to lesson 8. Observations. Seeing without asking. Seeing without asking. So in lesson 8, we shift to observation, studying behavior as it naturally unfolds. Unlike experiments, we don't manipulate, we simply watch. A good example is Maria and the playground. Maria wanted to study children's play. Instead of asking them, she observed directly. Over weeks, she noted games, conflicts, and leaders emerging. Observation gave her authentic insights that self-report couldn't capture. This is where you see the power of observations. The power of observations. Observation reveals the gap between what people say and what they actually do. Diaries, surveys, and interviews often don't align with real behavior. Observation bridges this gap by capturing truth in action. And here we recognize two very broad approaches to observation. Observation can be quantitative, which means structured, counting, coding behaviors, or qualitative, open-ended, descriptive, and interpretive. Each has strengths, numbers for patterns, narratives for meaning. This leads us to ask when to use each approach. Shortly, we can say that we should use quantitative observation when behaviors are clearly defined and countable. But we use qualitative when the context and process matter. Sometimes combining both yields the strongest insights. But there are more to that, no? Beyond numbers versus narratives, we also choose between participant and non-participant roles and overt versus covert observation. Each choice affects access, objectivity, and ethical considerations. Let's look at an example in action. So we can look at participant observation or non-participant observation. Pay attention at the photos. Uh, and overt versus covert, we've also explained that here already. You can pause the recording just in case. Okay? But you choose which is which. Now, let's look at the example here. So, in a classroom, a quantitative study might measure how often tech is used, while a qualitative study might describe teachers' beliefs, frustrations, and student reactions. Together, they paint a full picture of technology in practice. So, let's look at qualitative approach to technology use. Good observation requires skills, training observers, recording immediately, distinguishing description from interpretation, and staying reflexive about bias. Observation is simple in concept, but very demanding in practice. So we need to identify how we are going to move forward. Okay? How we're going to uh, move forward. So, but there is a challenge here. Observation itself changes behavior. People act differently when watched. No? Uh, Sorry. We call these the Hawthorne effect. And researchers counter these with longer observation, discrete methods, or triangulation with other data. On Friday at 1 in the afternoon, we will have the first PIRC talk, and there I will talk about conceptualization. And on the 24th, we will have the second PIRC talk, and there I will talk about operationalization. And in the operationalization of qualitative research, we will talk about triangulation. Triangulation. To close, observation is an art. It shows us the difference between espoused beliefs and actual practice. But it also requires humility. We see through our own cultural lenses. Being transparent about our stance makes observation stronger. Some key takeaways. Key points. Observation reveals real behavior. Different types serve different purposes. Reactivity must be managed. And reflexivity is essential for valid insights. Now, your Canvas task design, which has something to do also with which you have to submit as number 2 to the as an addition to the Canvas task in lesson 7. Your task is to pick one of your questions and then design an observational study. Decide whether it is quantitative or qualitative, participant or non-participant, overt or covert, and anticipate the challenges. And anticipate the challenges. There is more to the slides, as I've said, and I hope you would pay attention and go back and reread the data. Now let's look at lesson 9, document and text analysis. Our final method this week is document analysis, treating words, texts, and images as data to serve data to study culture, ideology, and even power. Let's look at the case of Carlos. Carlos analyzed government policy documents on climate change. He discovered leaders emphasized economic growth far more than sustainability. Far more than sustainability. This showed him what interviews might not, the priorities embedded in official discourse. But this leads you to ask, why analyze texts? Texts are everywhere. Policies, news, ads, social media, they're not neutral. They reflect assumptions, values, and power. By analyzing texts, we see not only what people say, but what they avoid saying. This is why we need to analyze texts. But what do documents reveal? Documents can show cultural values. They reveal power structures, frame issues ideologically, and illustrate historical change over time. They're cultural artifacts as much as they are sources of imagination. So that's why they're very important. So because we can draw a lot from them. So what are approaches to text analysis? Three approaches dominate: context analysis, which counts and quantifies; thematic analysis, which identifies recurring patterns and meanings; and discourse analysis, which exposes how language maintains or challenges power. Three, content, thematic, and discourse. Let's look at, so content analysis, this is how it looks like. Thematic analysis, this is how it looks like. And discourse analysis, this is how it looks like. We've already compared them. Now let's look at an example. Suppose we analyze how women are represented in STEM media with sample articles, code categories like role, descriptors, and context, then look for patterns in representation. What? So that's how we design it. What might we find? What might we find? So as you'd see, I've been skipping a few slides. I don't need to spoon feed everything. You can pause the recording and capture the slide. A quantitative study might find women appears less often or described differently than men. A qualitative analysis might reveal subtle ideologies. For instance, women framed as exemptional or tied to family roles in ways men are not. So these are possible insights that we see. Now, what's the power of document analysis? Documents themselves are evidence. They reveal the cultural norms and ideologies shaping society. Media, for example, both reflects and reinforces gender expectations. Document analysis makes those visible. Now, the question is, how do we assure rigor in the document analysis? To ensure rigor, researchers must be transparent about their sampling and coding. Check reliability across coders, ground their categories in theory, and remain reflexive about their own assumptions. Now, some closing reflections. Texts are windows into society. They show us what's thinkable, what's silenced, and how language legitimizes power. In today's digital world, we can analyze massive corpora, but the interpretive work, making sense of meaning, remains central. So, what are our key takeaways for document analysis? One, texts are data. Two, multiple approaches exist from counting to deep interpretation. Three, language constructs reality, shaping what can be said. And four, rigor requires transparency and reflexivity. Let's look at your Canvas task sheet. Your task is to select relevant documents, choose an approach, content, thematic, or discourse, and outline your plan. Think carefully about sampling, coding, and what insights you hope to uncover. Please put this one together with the Canvas task for week 7, week 8, and week 9. Now, lesson 7, lesson 8, and lesson 9. So let's synthesize what we have learned so far. There are 3 ways of knowing. To synthesize, experiments test causation. Observation reveal authentic behavior. And document analysis uncovers cultural values and ideologies. Each method gives us different tools for understanding social life. As we move forward, remember your methodological choices are not just technical. They reflect your beliefs about knowledge itself. Choose methods that fit your question, not the other way around. Be rigorous, be ethical, and be humble in your interpretations. Thank you very much for listening today. And that's our lesson 7, 8, and 9. Good day. Ciao.